Hey, I know we're probably a suspect narrator on this, but we're going to do another list show, and it's going to be quick. It's not.
Super fast.
It's not going to be like an hour and 40 minutes like our last short video was. So we'll see how it goes. This is a video from the Rock Rebirth YouTube channel, and they listed the top 10 albums that destroyed band's career. One band destroyed itself a couple times. And so we got that going for us. And so I'll be interested in going through this because I have a hunch of these 10 albums, between the two of us, at least four of them have been purchased, would be my guess, and maybe even five. So we'll see on that. But
Sounds
okay,
right.
it's gonna be pretty close to that. We'll find out. So um, I'll go ahead and just we're going to go through 1 through 10 and see what kind of commentary we have on there, whether we agree or disagree, and figure at the end if you're interested, if you have any big omission you'd like to make. I certainly have one that I'd like to add. So on that, and it's not the one you'd think, but but we'll start with Guns N' Roses, friend of the show, Chinese Democracy, the Brian Wilson smile of Guns N' Roses. Years in production. And Rock Rebirth lists as one of the albums that was a pretty big black mark for Guns N' Roses. You're a resident expert, sir. What are your thoughts on that positioning?
So, I mean, anything I say is going to sound somewhat biased. But I think it'd be more accurate to say that because this was a commercially successful album, and their biggest tour actually came years after this album. So it didn't stop the band or slow them down, and it made a ton of money. So, I mean, it wasn't a failure by any measure. I think it's more accurate to say this was very divisive among Guns N' Roses fans, mainly because of Slash being not on the record. He's a fan favorite member. So Duff McKagan is not on here either. He's another fan favorite, but he had a good relationship with the band after leaving and eventually came back. He left to become a solo artist, whereas Slash did not leave on amicable terms. So it was a lot of back and forth between them, and I think it just divided the fan base more than anything else. So anything I say about it, I mean, people have to form their own opinions. Anything I say is going to sound biased. The only thing I want to comment on what they said is they do repeat some things that aren't factual about the band. One of them is kind of true, but not in the way that they're framing it. They said that Axl Rose was the only original member who appeared on there. That's true, but not in the way that they're saying it. Axl Rose was already the only original member by the time anybody watching this ever heard of Guns N' Roses. It was a revolving lineup of his backing band for years. In fact, they weren't even called Guns N' Roses. It was just Rose and then Hollywood Rose. And the reason that they changed the name was because he wanted a guitar player named Tracy Guns to join the band, and Tracy Guns didn't want to be his backing band member. So he changed the name to Guns N' Roses to make him feel like it was a band and that they were in it together. And then Tracy Guns quit, but Axl Rose was like, "I like that name though." So we're gonna stick with it. Actually, I have a prop, of course. This is one of their early demos before they changed their name to Guns N' Roses. You can see it says Hollywood Rose. So there's and only Axl Rose from the classic lineup is on here. So that's true, but not in the way they're making it sound. That there were no other, classic lineup people around. The other thing that I see parroted a lot that you don't have to take my word for it because of lawsuits. All of this stuff is is public information. Um, there's a lot of things that say it's either the most or one of the most expensive albums ever made, and you usually see somewhere between like 13 and 16 million dollars. And while I don't know what it cost, and I'm sure it was very expensive, that's not realistic in any way because infamously now, because there was a lot of lawsuits about it, Universal, through a deal with that was brokered by Live Nation, the touring company, pre-sold 1 million copies of the album to Best Buy that they were not allowed to return no matter what the band did, which seems like a weird. parent of phrase. It's the Carol Baskin will. You know what I mean? If they disappear, kind of thing. So, and of course, the band turned around and then toured Europe, where there was more money instead of touring the US, which is what Best Buy assumed they would do after buying 1 million copies of their album. That 1 million copies, though, which they spent a few $1 million on, pushed the album way into the black already. So it didn't cost anywhere near the amount of money that gets reported. And that's public record because Best Buy, Live Nation sued each other back and forth over this deal that Best Buy said they were, maybe correctly misinformed about what was about to happen once the record came out. But their few $1 million or whatever they spent more than covered the cost of the album before. So it was in profit before it ever came out. So it didn't cost anywhere near that amount of money. I know makes it sound more crazy and stuff to say that, but it didn't cost anywhere near that.
Yeah, and I think the other thing it suffers from, I don't really kind of feel it's appropriate for this list for kind of a number of reasons, but um, that whole process of the anticipation of I'm making this amazing thing, and so I mean
Mm.
George R. R. Martin deals with it with his next Game of Thrones book, and Smile by Brian Wilson was never going to live up to the hype at the point of that. So it's kind of fair to say on that. So all right, I assume that's a in our purchase counter. That's an album you purchased.
Oh yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
cool. That's the ding. There's one. Okay, Metallica, Saint Anger. Um, Not Metallica's only entry on this list, so they
They
shot
ruined their
themselves
career twice.
in both feet. Um, I'm not steeped in uh things Metallica, um, but I could kind of see some of the points that were being made for it, but I don't know enough of the other catalog to know is there any other thing else lurking there that uh also did them a disservice. So I'm not going to argue on this one, but I didn't know if you had any additional insights on Saint Anger.
Yeah, I mean, this is the one that people usually point to as sort of like the downfall of Metallica or like their big misstep. That's really not true though. And I'm not going to defend the record because I actually don't like this album. I did buy it. I don't like this album. It's poorly produced. That's my main. And unfortunately for Metallica, the production of this album was immortalized in a documentary about them, and that's not a good thing. I think the documentary did far more damage. It's a really good movie, but did far more damage to Metallica's career than this album did. As far as what the album itself did, it's sort of to use video game terms, since we talk a lot about retro games, it's like Nintendo 64. Nintendo 64 wasn't a failure, but it was the first time Nintendo wasn't Nintendo, like leading the charge, top of the pile. This was the first time, and Metallica's made records that have sold way less than, like, this was still a successful record. Metallica has had failed records since then, more than one failed record since then. And to Metallica's credit and detriment, they're very open about talking about that kind of stuff. Again, go watch that documentary. Really good as a documentary, really bad if you want to be taken seriously as a musician, but a good documentary. Because it's just them squabbling and acting like dumb kids the whole time. And it makes Metallica look like the absolute worst of what people who hate Metallica think of them. And particularly a scene where Lars Ulrich, I can't even speak, who at that time had alienated a lot of fans because of lawsuits about file sharing, talked about how he needed to sell these paintings that he had, which equated to a few $1 million that he made, and was like, thank God my kids will be able to eat and finish the school year. Like, it just showed them as being insanely out of touch and maybe not the greatest musicians in the world on top of it. But to their credit or detriment, they're always very open and honest about things. This is not their biggest stumble, but it was the first time that they weren't on the top of the pile anymore. It was a big step down for them in terms of sales. Again, still sold well, but not Metallica level. I saw somebody describe this once. There's a great show called Train Records that I brought up before on YouTube, and he did this record, and he even pointed out like this is not the lowest point in Metallica, but it's the first time that Metallica went from being huge, period, to just huge for a metal band, if that makes sense. Like there was a time when Metallica was just one of the biggest bands in the world. After this, they were just one of the bigger metal bands.
Fair enough. Fair enough on that one. More on Metallica
Yeah.
momentarily.
Now the next one though.
But the next one is Rolling Stones, number two on a recent list of the top 50 albums. We should go take a listen to that. Have some time available, though. It's not short. But the Rolling Stones' Dirty Work. This is tough because there's a couple candidates for Stones. Certainly, they're kind of depicted. These are the albums that ruined the band. Last I can tell, you know, they roll out their wheelchairs and still go. So I would say the band's not been ruined. Um, there hasn't really been, I think, any reputation change. The Stones are the Stones are the Stones, and there's just kind of a recognition that the later Stone albums are a little bit pale in comparison to some of their earlier work. My biggest quibble with this is I think Steel Wheels would be a better choice than Dirty Work um, for this list, but neither of those rise to the level of massive harm to the reputation. So, yeah, it's not a
Yeah.
great album, but it's still a Stones. So another one I was just had a quibble with. There's several on this list I don't have a quibble with. Um, and there's disproportionate representation by bands I'm a pretty big fan of. So, as we get a little deeper in the list, but I'm not sure how this stands out versus any of their later work any much differently. So it's like, okay, if you want to talk about there's a little bit off their fastball, sure, but I'm not a I'm not a thing. It's not like they tried to do a ska album or anything. So
Yeah, I mean, I it's not a record that I hear people really talk about a lot. And I'm not the biggest Stones fan in the world, so I would go more off of what other people who are bigger fans than me would say. But I never hear people say that this is their worst record. In fact, I think Bridges to Babylon or Steel Wheels would make way more sense being on here because I remember like people still bitch about Bridges to Babylon. That's like 30 years old now, and people still complain about that record. I don't ever really hear this mentioned. Maybe that's worse. I don't know. But one of the things I thought was funny in their complaint about it in the text to speech voiceover that's on this, they talk about like the synth work on there. There's a lot of piano and keyboards and synth stuff in Rolling Stones records. Maybe there's more of it on this record, but that was a thing in the 80s that I've mentioned before, how like every band just kind of forced that onto records in the 80s. I don't think this was any more or less egregious than anything else. And again, I don't mean this as a compliment necessarily, but if you listen to early Mick Jagger's solo tracks, they're super synth based. He was really into experimenting with synth stuff. Not well, I would say, but I mean, it's there, it exists, and long before this record. So that's a weird complaint to me.
yeah, yeah, yeah. If it's the presence of keyboards and Stone stuff is not a late development either, and
Right.
then you're right. It's kind of the whole '80s overturn starts that. More on that arrival of synth also on this list a little bit in shortly. Lou Reed and Metallica. Metallica returns. Lulu. This one I believe does deserve on the list because I had no idea this existed whatsoever, and I like Lou Reed quite a bit. I'm not a huge fan of Lou Reed the poet reading spoken word stuff exclusively, but Lou Reed the musician, things like New York, albums like New York, gigantic fan. Even songs of for Dorella when he did with John Cale for Andy Warhol. That's great, great stuff. So I'm already like, yeah, Lou Reed, spoken word stuff, not my thing. He got later in his career, he got into that a lot more. That never really resonated with me. And if I was in the market to say who's going to back me up as I read you my gritty poetry, I don't know why you'd pick Metallica, but that's just me.
So there's first, I'll defend it a little bit. There's a little bit of a Shaq Fu situation that happens with this record now, because most people don't know it exists, and the ones that do try to pretend it doesn't. But it is now 25 years old or something like that, 20 years old. It's old. It's been out for a long time. One of the things about it is it's a little bit of a Shaq Fu thing. It sounds insane to think that Lou Reed and Metallica made a record together now. In the moment, it's not as crazy as it sounded though, because Metallica was Lou Reed's backing band for his Rock and Roll Hall of Fame induction. So they backed him up playing Lou Reed songs with Lou Reed singing, and Metallica essentially is just his band. And it sounded pretty good. In fact, people were kind of pumped about it because it just sounded like classic Lou Reed songs, but a little punchier, with Metallica adding a little more grit to it, the way that we talk about Alice songs sounding better live sometimes. So when they announced they were going to make a record together, it wasn't as crazy as it sounds out of context now, because everybody was kind of excited about that at the time. So everybody's like, oh, that could be cool. And the assumption was they were just going to do those songs, the classically Reed songs. Maybe they might do a new song or two. And then as things started to leak out, people started to get worried, because then it was like, it's going to be all new songs. It's like, oh, weird choice. Okay. And then they were like, it's not really songs, though. It's Lou Reed reading obscure German poetry, while Metallica just jams randomly behind him with no structure whatsoever. Huh. And it's a double album. Ugh. It's like, wow, do we need a lot of that? Is that what's coming here?
The
So we talked.
long-awaited sequel to Metal Music. So
Yeah. And I, again, going back to Metallica, or to their credit or detriment, very honest. At the time that this came out, I was writing a music column in Philly. And so I got to hear a lot of big records well before they came out. And I got to listen to this before most people heard it. And it was accompanied by a press release written by Lars, who is the drummer of Metallica, but their frontman. They're one of those bands where the singer isn't really the frontman. Lars is really the person who does all the press and all that kind of stuff, the drummer. And they're the only two founding members in the band. Um, he, again, very honest, was like, this is weird and most people aren't going to like it. And they were just like, look, this is what it is. We love Lou Reed. We were really influenced by him and some of his experimental stuff, and he wanted us to be his backing band on a record. We thought it was going to be playing, hits like we did when we backed him up live. He wanted to do this. We're not going to say no to Lou Reed. Was kind of they were like, this was for us. It was a career highlight. You guys are going to hate it. Here it is. And yeah, I mean, they were very honest about what it was. In no way was there any spin put on this or them trying to pitch this as anything other than what it is. Now, we talked about how Saint Anger was like their Nintendo 64. It it didn't fail, but it was the first time they weren't at the top of the pile. This failed hard. So I looked it up just so I could be ready for this, because I do work. This album, as of today, or as of this year, had sold 280,000 copies worldwide. This is a double album, which means that those sales were counted twice. So really, it sold 140,000 copies. If you're thinking, well, that's not so bad, it is by Metallica standards. Metallica has multiple diamond albums that have sold more than 10 million copies. This sold 140,000 copies. And that's including what they call album equivalent units. So that means music video plays that they were paid for, and streaming numbers are counted towards that. So it didn't even sell 140,000 CDs. That's streaming and sales combined. if I put out something that only sold that much, I would get dropped from my record label. So, just for perspective, Metallica and Lou Reed together tanked that hard.
Yeah, because you add the fan bases of both, and you
Yeah.
still don't sell that many. And in fact, I didn't even know the thing existed. Um, Fair to have on this list. But again, I mean, and so if this is just like, hey, here's a really bad thing they did, okay. Obviously, this is another one that wasn't an ender for anybody. Things moved
Right.
on.
Yeah.
Realistically, almost none of these ended. There's only, I know one for sure you could say, um, I wouldn't say it ended, but I would say it was the last album done by the group. But I don't think I think the album was a result of what had happened with the group. But we'll talk about that shortly. Um, and so we were, I think, so Chinese Democracy. You bought Saint Anger. That
Yes.
was you did buy. So there's two. I don't think either of us bought Dirty Work.
No.
Um, Pretty confident neither of us bought Lulu.
No, but I did get to listen to it before it
We did
came
get to
out.
listen to it, but we're gonna purchase money out of pocket. So we're at 2 out of the 10 so far, halfway through the list. As we go to Queen Hot Space, I bought the album. I listened to the album twice. The second time to make sure my feelings were clear, and then I never listened to the album again. And I had become at that point a pretty big Queen fan. And talking about the explosion of synthesizers in 80s music, Queen, was proud of their gritty Iggy Pop like guitar heavy sound that they're noted for, and also used to proudly write across the back of all their albums, "No synthesizers!" exclamation point until the game, and then there was boy is there synthesizers, lots of synthesizers, but reasonably well used because the game was a good album. The Works followed Game. It also, now synthesizers are okay. So it's present there. Works, another good album. Then Hot Space. Uh, Freddie was a big fan of the dance scene and really wanted them to do a dance scene album. And I don't know if you really could consider Under Pressure, which ended up just kind of coming, wasn't within this kind of corpus of work, but Bowie was there and they kind of came up with something to do. So it's not so much a dance music kind of thing. But obviously, Under Pressure, it's the only redeeming item on this album. It didn't, it did not destroy Queen, but I would confidently say it is their worst album by a mile. Just there's nothing in it. If you're a Queen fan, there's just to me there's very little in it that harkens back to anything that you typically associate with Queen, a sound and those types of things. And so, um, from the album art to the content within, it's horrible all the way around. Under Pressure couldn't even save it. And so this will put us at 3 album purchases on that. But it was there's only one album purchase I regret more than this. And it didn't make the list, but it's going to make the list at the end because I'm going to bring it up.
So this is a record. So I've mentioned before, I like Queen. I'm not the biggest Queen fan, so I don't have a ton of knowledge of them. The only thing I know about this record is that Under Pressure is on it. It's easy, just like Chinese Democracy's Budget. It's easy to kind of use the the information around it to kind of extrapolate, though, that this didn't do well. And you can do that by someone else's record. I have another prop. Vanilla Ice. So this isn't the big record. This is actually Vanilla Ice's demo. And the Guns N' Roses demo was a repress. This is the original pressing of Vanilla Ice's demo that got him signed. On here is a song called Ice Ice Baby, which sounds a little bit like Under Pressure.
with an extra.
Um, some people have noticed a slight resemblance between the songs. I don't hear it, but some people have noticed it. But Queen and David Bowie, early on, once Vanilla Ice got signed and the song was repackaged on his actual official album that came out, um, they obviously found out about it as the song started to take off, and opted, instead of going to court over this, which they could potentially lose. That's important to point out because even though it has that extra ding in there, it is actually not the same as Under Pressure. It's what we would now, it was called at the time, but is a more commonplace thing now. It's called an interpolation. So it's where you take a recognizable piece of something and put it into a larger piece of original music. It's a little bit different than sampling. Sampling's when you take something and loop it and make that the song. Whereas the under pressure and Ice Ice Baby bass line, the whole under pressure bass line is just that repetitive part. That's one piece of the Ice Ice Baby bass line, which actually has a lot more. There's more of it that's not under pressure than is, to oversimplify it. So, but that super recognizable under pressure bass riff is a part of it. So it became sort of it would have been a really landmark thing as far as sampling and interpolations go, but they opted to take care of it outside of court because it was worth way more money, even in those early stages, than actual under pressure was. So it didn't benefit Queen or Bowie to have the song go away. So instead, they took writing credits and publishing royalties off of it and have both said that it's one of their most successful songs and made more money than Under Pressure or the album that it was on. So, extrapolating from that, I understand that this was not the high point of Queen's career.
Without question. Okay, Black Sabbath. Another, we're back into kind of Mike's wheelhouse here. Forbidden. Um, it's another one that there's not a lot of familiar faces. I think that's fair to say on this one. Um, uh, we were at a purchase count of three. I'm assuming this was a purchase for you. Put us at four.
Yeah.
Clearly, we don't know what we're doing. We're buying all these bad albums by people. Um, as a big fan, what are your thoughts on additional context on Forbidden?
For a long time, this was Black Sabbath, in my opinion, worst album, and in pretty much everybody's opinion, including Black Sabbath's opinion. So at the time that this was made, they were planning a big reunion show, like a stadium reunion show with Ozzy, and that was going to be recorded with the whole original lineup if they could get the drummer through all the songs. And they were going to record that for a live release. The problem was, though, they still owed a record to a different record label. So, really quickly using his live band and Tony Martin, who, if anybody is a Black Sabbath fan, Tony Martin kind of came and went over the years whenever they needed a singer and didn't have somebody. He was a friend of Tony Iommi's, and whenever they didn't have a singer, it was him. So he got Tony Martin and his live Tony Iommi got Tony Martin and his live band together, and they literally shit out an album in like a couple of weeks. So, and honestly, I think from the things that they've said, didn't even think it would ever come out. They just slapped something together, turned it into the record company, and were like, "It's your problem now," and then went off to do the Ozzy reunion and live record, unencumbered by this. Unfortunately for them, the record label did put the record out, and they were horrified to learn that the record label made a ton of changes to it because they didn't care and didn't really think anything would come of it. They weren't involved in any way in the post-production of the album, the mixing, mastering, any of that stuff. So a lot of changes were made to it by the record label, including using different takes and rearranging songs without the band's input at all. So it was already not going to be them putting their best foot forward, but according to them, sounded even worse than what they had actually turned in by the time the record label was done. A lot of people, and to a degree, myself included, didn't think it could get much better, even if the record label did use alternate takes and make changes to the songs. Last year, though, they remastered a bunch of the Tony Martin records, including this one, and went back, got all the original recordings, and mixed it the way that they had originally turned it in, using their original takes. And I will say it's now their second worst of their career. So, I mean, it's a huge improvement, the remastered version, because, and again, it is vastly different. Some of the songs are obviously completely different takes, and a couple of the guys who played on this are dead. So it's not like they re recorded them. Like, it's obviously different takes that they used. So it does sound vastly better. It's still inferior songs, though. It's still something they slapped together just to fulfill a contractual obligation that they really didn't care about. And ultimately, that shows through. I would just say it's not as cut and dry the worst thing they've ever done now because it sounds slightly better.
Fair enough. It's fourth purchase we've had on the list. Don't think this next one's gonna ring the cash register for either of us. Van Halen 3.
Nope.
No. Um, as we mentioned recently, as we discussed Van Halen on a previous show, uh, I dislike significantly. Well, I dislike one Van Halen frontman. The frontman for this one, I'm indifferent on because he's completely forgettable. And I'm okay with Sammy Hagar, although I think Sammy Hagar, separate from Van Halen, is better than Sammy Hagar with Van Halen. But
I agree with that. Yeah.
that's a different show.
Yeah, this is really so I have heard this record, believe it or not, because I have a lot of friends who are Van Halen fans. This is really an Eddie Van Halen solo record and not a Van Halen record. Which sounds weird to say because it's his name, it's the name of the band, but he plays almost everything on this. This is not a band effort. He plays almost everything on this. He even sings a couple of the songs himself. And he's not a singer. So let me throw that out there. That's not great. And there's also a couple of instrumental songs. So while Gary Sharon is credited as the vocalist on this record, he barely is. He sings on like two-thirds of it. So he's kind of the vocalist on this one. And as far as Gary Sharon goes, his singing's fine. He's famous for being the singer of the band Extreme. I've never liked them, and that's going to sound biased too because of some social media stuff that happened last year with them, but I never liked Extreme. They're just one of those bands, like, I can understand that technically it's fine, it just never clicked for me personally. And then you throw on, this isn't even really a Gary Sharon record. He sings on two-thirds of the songs. There's a few instrumentals and a few that Eddie Van Halen sings himself, and he plays almost all of the music himself. So it's really just an Eddie Van Halen solo record.
Yep. And they obviously still stuck around.
Yeah, and
So,
it didn't end the band.
yeah.
So
So get that on there too. Dylan self-portrait. Um, I was surprised. So I wasn't surprised that Dylan was on the list, although again, they're saying, these were the poison pills for the bands. It's Dylan took a lot of poison pills. He seemed to keep on keeping on. Uh, I would have thought one of his more overtly Christian albums, like Saved, might have been uh, the candidate for here versus Self Portrait. I'm not super familiar with uh, the track list for this album, but it you notice the video jumping a little bit around on this show. It's as I'm slowly dying. This might be the show I die. So we'll keep that part in if it happens. There's
got
some
to get
edits
those
there. I'm
numbers.
just coughing up lungs right and left. Um, so I'm not super familiar with it. I kind of listened to what they had to say on it. Like, okay, sounds pretty bad, but I think some of the things like Saved, I'd probably have more as saying this might be like his not greatest stuff. But your thoughts?
So I'm not very familiar with this record or a lot of Dylan's catalog. I only know some of his stuff. I did see him live. many decades after this. So obviously this didn't end his career, like Kelly said. Also too, and maybe this isn't the point of the list, but to me, and maybe I'm wrong, but I never listened to something from Dylan and thought he's trying to get a hit song here.
Yeah.
Like that's never been my takeaway from that. So I don't know how you would differentiate like, oh, this is not commercial period over, like I never I guess I missed that record where he was singing like super catchy sellout songs.
Hook laden.
Yeah. So I don't know how you would differentiate that with Dylan, to be honest with you. It sounds like from what they were saying, this is something that was divisive among fans, so more of a Chinese democracy situation.
Yeah. Although I would argue maybe Infidels by Dylan might be his most um, hook laden's a little generous, but most accessible Dylan perhaps. Neighborhood Bully's a great song. And one of the few Dylan albums I own, as a matter of fact. So yeah, so okay, probably wasn't that great, but to your point, it's like he's kind of always um, done his own thing in different ways. So it's kind of hard to put one of his things on the list because of that. Two more on there. I bought both of them. So so let's start off with the Clash. Cut the crap. This is the one album that did officially end the group. This was the group was already gone basically because Joe Strummer had fired everybody pretty much. Paul Simeon, Simon Dunn rather was still there playing bass, but uh, ill-advisedly, um, so Mick Jones had a problem showing up on time. Actually, Mick was already in the group, and they brought Joe in to them. But somehow Joe, I guess just by the force of Joe Strummer's personality, became the decision maker and said, "You're fired." He fired Mick Jones. So it's like he was brought into the band, but he kind of became the poobah and so sent him on his way because Mick couldn't seem to make it on time to studio time rehearsals and etc. So um, placed him with two guitarists. Didn't really have a game plan in place. I mean, Joe's always brought kind of the spirit and the lyrics and the energy behind the Clash's movement. Mick, the soundscape is largely a Mick Jones configuration. Um, so mix out. They had a cool cover. They did a good job with the cover. Um, but as a massive Clash fan, it's so hard to get through this one. There's a "We Are the Clash." Yeah, I almost could like, but it's just so far away from everything else. I mean, and there's things there's tracks on Sandinista I'm not thrilled about, but there's also tracks on Sandinista that I'm in love with because it's the Clash being the Clash and all that good stuff. So truly a pretty horrific outing, admitted to by Joe. He's like, I don't know why we should have never have done that. It's a bad idea. He just shut everything down afterwards. Said this is not working. So I think probably their most valid one to have on the list. One if they're going through, I expected to have on the list. So you get no argument from me, full support. Makes me revisit a sad part of my life, but I think fair. So, and it's a shame too, because while it never reached any of the commercial success that the Clash, or critical success really even, that the Clash received, Joe went on over time. He did a solo album, didn't do great, but he did some other stuff over time that was pretty much appreciated and just kind of let him still create the kind of stuff that he liked to create. So it just wasn't with the Clash anymore. So yep, it's bad. I can attest. And
So
with a
I'm
four,
not familiar with this record. I mean, I know of it, but I've never really sat down and listened to this record. There's one song off it I know that I've heard, but other than that, I'm not sure I've even heard entire songs off of this record. I know from Kelly though, and other Clash fans, and especially people online, this was not well received
Nope.
among the core fan base at all. And it sounds like it was something that just strayed too far from what the Clash was, from everything I've garnered from listening about it. I also saw a video where somebody was talking about this once and saying that there was Joe Strummer was maybe listening a lot to management ideas rather than his own creative input, and maybe that was part of it as well. So I don't know. I don't know enough about the Clash to know if that's accurate.
Yeah. Yeah, it was just ill conceived, and some documentary stuff and reviews and things I've read in the past too talked about one of the biggest blows was that the two guitarists that came in, neither one of them really. So am I the lead guitarist? Are you the lead guitarist? What are we? What are we supposed to do? Since roles were not clearly defined, that didn't help. To kind of people were they're kind of going back and forth trying to establish their turf and all that. So, but yeah, just not great. And to wind up the list. The Who, It's Hard. Um, Another album I bought. Um, I'm not sure. So yeah, it's not great. I mean, it's not Quadrophenia. So we'll get that. But it's the first album without Keith Moon. Um, so there's that, and there's a big change when that happens, obviously. But it has like Athena on it, which is the Rolling Stone album review says as they hit the second chorus of Athena and Pete singing just a girl, you're in Who heaven. And it was a very archetypical Who song, Athena. And so it was just the kind of stuff when the Who excel. It's the kind of sound you would get from them. So it was good. Eminence Front is a different um, sound, much more synth heavy again. But there was Bob O'Reilly's not exactly you know synth light. Um, pretty cool song. Dangerous by John Entwistle is I always like Entwistle contributions, and this is more uh, one of my favorites. And it actually was made their set lists, which his stuff very seldom did upon album release, but they kind of show up later. So there's good songs on it. There's some filler on it as well. Um, I'm not sure it's any better or worse than Face Dances. This is the other album they released without Keith, and then it was very and of course very late in their career. Um, they kind of released a couple things, Townsend and Daltrey. Um, the Wire being one of the ones towards the end that I don't really consider Who albums, even though they say they're Who albums. Endless Wire, I guess, is the full title of that album. But I don't know. It's not their best. There's plenty of stuff on it to like. I'm not sure it belongs on this list. So that'd be my thoughts.
Yeah, I got to defer to Kelly on this one. I'm not knowledgeable enough of the Who, and I don't know this record. But Kelly is a true fan. He Sherpa'd me through a lot more Who than I was already familiar with. So I defer to you completely on this one.
Yeah, and if we go back and start doing some prisoner exchanges, it's hard. It's probably not on my short list to say, yeah, Mike, let's go through and go track by track on it. It's hard. So we'll see. Maybe John, Too Late to Hero, John Entwistle's solo album he did with Joe Walsh. That might be one, but not It's Hard. All right. Any album or two you want to call out that you felt should have been on here or not?
Oh, 100%. I don't know how Beach Boys Summer in Paradise isn't on here. That was the Mike Love Beach Boys record. So Mike Love kept the name alive while Brian Wilson sort of drifted away from the band. Brian Wilson wasn't involved in the live band for quite a long time. At that point, he was the studio guy though. Most of what you heard on the records was written and performed almost entirely by him for many years at that point, while Mike Love led the live version of the Beach Boys. So there was already a distinct separation of these being two different bands at that point. Brian Wilson and his studio guys, and then Mike Love and the live version of the Beach Boys that went around. The live version though started to become the only version as Brian Wilson drifted further away, and then finally Mike Love got his own hit song with Kokomo, which was a big hit late in their career, late in the game for them. So Mike Love got to take the reins on an actual album under the Beach Boys name, Summer in Paradise, and the Beach Boys, including Mike Love, like to pretend it doesn't exist now. It's pretty bad. It is Uncle Jesse heavy, which I'll give. It's the only studio album that he's on the whole thing of that I'm aware of. He's in the video for Kokomo, but the only thing that's kind of memorable, I guess, about the album is the re-recording of Forever with John Stamos on vocals, which became a hit after the record already came and went because it got used on Full House as like, and it became a plot point on Full House. They had the Uncle Jesse character in the show record Forever with the Beach Boys. So that actually became like a plot of the show. The record had already come and went at that point, though. So you couldn't even get it. And they've never reissued it, they've never remastered it. Even Mike Love tries to pretend that this didn't happen. It's terrible. Mike Love raps more than once on the album. And not like when rap and rock was a thing. This was just like he heard a rap song somewhere and was like, I could do that. This, yeah, it's, I guess, ahead of its time in that sense, but this was like 90, 91, something like that. So yeah, it was, yeah. He also references Kokomo as well as all of their other more successful songs constantly on songs, as almost daring you to go listen to something better as you're listening to it.
Yeah, I mean, Alice does that a lot too, but it's much more connective tissue and,
Yeah.
guilty and some other things there that make their way through there versus just a blatant attempt to say, try and glom onto past successes made by somebody who's not you. So, because
Yeah.
at least when Alice is being self-referential, he's truly being self-referential. So, Mike Love is often pointing to Brian Wilson work, except for Kokomo, of course. But all right. So you might have thought mine would have been raise your fist and yell as
I
as
kind
a
of thought that's where we were going.
yeah, and but I mean it did put me on an Alice sabbatical for a while. It was not as attuned to his stuff for a little bit. Then Constrictor came along and I said, all is right with the world once more. And I returned to the fold with Constrictor. And I probably would have done that with Last Temptation had I known about it at the time. But the no, the one I'll go with is it's why I turned in my discharge papers to the Kiss Army Dynasty with I Was Made for Loving You Baby as their big track on there. And they had gone redid all the costumes to these ridiculous um things. There was all sorts of different hairstyles now. It was like a whole kind of like attempt to repackage something that had already been regularly packaging in every different form possible. But Dynasty was just uh, unforgivable to me, and that ended it for me. That would have been the one that, not again that the Kiss was in rarefied air before Dynasty, but you knew what you were going to get. Something like Destroyer's a really good, solid rock album. Even their early stuff, Rock and Roll All Night, and what's good, Love Gun's actually not bad either. But this was just an album that I disliked almost from top to bottom. Um, I think if I remember right, because I don't listen to it very often, I think 2000 Man, a Rolling Stones song, Ace covers that on the album. That it's its like soul redeeming quality, if memory serves. I'll have to double check on that, but I'm pretty sure that that's where that sat. And that's the only song that didn't make me mad on this whole thing. So um, you got that. So that's what I would have definitely had that on there. And I was really expecting it to be on, but I guess they could have gone with songs from The Elder as well, which was another really bad idea. But um, that was just a bad idea. This is a bad album. Dynasty is just a bad, bad album. Um, so we'll see on that. Cool. Hey, well, why don't you subscribe to the blog? Not Mike. I'm not talking to Mike here. I'm talking to you, the viewer. Hey, viewers. Although I'm not sure if Mike's subscribed or not. So maybe
Of
Mike,
course, sir. Of
why don't
course.
you and the rest of the viewers subscribe to the Bog Panda YouTube channel? Share this video, give her a like, let us know what you think in the comments. If you have albums you'd like to add to it, if you argue against any of our commentary on the ones that were on it, if you have a big beef with anything that's on there, let us know that. Um, check out our website. Link is in the description. Got some royalty-free ROMs out there, fully freely to be distributed out there, so you can just get that with no licensing issues whatsoever for the Game Boy, Nintendo Entertainment System, and some Doom levels. So you can check all that good stuff out. More to come. That's going to continue to grow on Bog Panda Vision. And I think we failed again in being short, but we can be short. Hard no, World's Shortest Podcast. Every episode less than a minute, over 1,000, well over 1,000 at this point. Check that out as well. Published daily, as long as Kelly stays on top of things. So it's usually published daily. Anything to add before we wrap up?
No, I think that's it, sir.
Thanks for watching, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
Bog Panda.